Okay, so we are now broadcasting, and we're going to let people to start coming in, but then I'm going to pause. Okay, so we've resumed the recording, and we are going to go ahead and get this virtual vacation going. So for those of you who are new to this, Take a Virtual Vacation was started about 8 or 10 weeks ago. Because of the COVID-19 lockdown, people weren't traveling. We were going all a little bit stir crazy, and we were looking for a way to still be able to escape at least once a week. So we decided to go on vacation every week, even if it's only for an hour. And of course, it's virtual, so no masks required. This week, our destination, we're going as far south as south can get, to Antarctica. And who are we in Take a Virtual Vacation? This was started by 4 travel agents, each with a different travel agency. Myself, I am Susan Schaefer. I own Ships and Trips Travel here in Middle Tennessee. We have Maria Stephanopoulos.
Hello.
She is the owner of Ingenious Travel in the Tampa Bay area of Florida. And the other 2 travel agents are located in California. That's Barbara Oliver with Altogether Now Travel and Gail Sherman with Wine Lovers Travel. And you can find us virtually on Facebook. We have a Facebook group that you can find, and if you don't already belong to it, you can join it. It's called Take a Virtual Vacation. And then we have started meetup groups. So right now we have one in the greater Tampa area and Middle Tennessee. It's called Eat, Drink, Travel Middle Tennessee and Eat, Drink, Travel Greater Tampa Bay. We're going to have more coming as they get set up in other destinations. In California and Detroit probably will be the next ones that'll be coming up. But that's where you can find us virtually in these meetup groups, as well as the Facebook group. You can find our future destinations that we're traveling to. And you can also, in the Facebook group, find the recorded sessions, as well as we have a YouTube channel where you can find our recorded sessions from the past. So if you want to go to Alaska, if you want to go to Washington, D.C. or New Orleans, or any of the other destinations that we've already been to, you can find them both on Facebook and YouTube. But that's who we are. That's where you can find us. And right now we're going to turn this over to Jennifer, and she is going to take us on vacation to Antarctica.
Oh, yes. All right. I'm going to take you to Antarctica. Confirm with me, girls. That's what you can see on the screen. To travel is to live.
Yeah, we can.
Yay. Well, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone who's here. My name is Jennifer Reynolds. I live in Tampa, Florida. And I had the pleasure of living and working on cruise ships for a very long period of time. In fact, that photo on the bottom right-hand side was taken in 1991. Been doing this travel thing a long time. Last year, about this time, I just returned from Africa, from Tanzania, but some of my most productive years were on cruise ships, where I had the pleasure of working for 18 years. And last December, I had a chance to go to the Antarctic and actually walk on the white continent. And I want to share that journey with you all this afternoon. It was one of the most exquisite, unusual, and surreal experiences that I have ever had. It was more than I anticipated. It was different than I thought it was going to be, and it was every bit as magnificent, if not more. I chose to do some kayaking and physical activities while I was there. And what inspired me to go was a girlfriend. She was sending me photographs like this and posting photos on her Instagram. And then I discovered that she had been to the Antarctic on board this small ship, and I wanted to have the experience that she did. My girlfriend there, that's her in Guatemala. I had a chance to visit with her. She used to live in the U.S. She moved to Guatemala about 2 years ago. And I was seeing these kind of posts from Maureen, and I said, yeah, my friend, I need to have this experience. Let's talk about it. And that's what led me to invest in a 14-day trip to go to the Antarctic. And I'm delighted that you're going to share the journey with me this afternoon. This was the ship that I did the experience on. You will not be staying in any hotels there. You're going to need to do some homework. I'm glad you're connected with some travel pros because it's a complicated kind of place. This was my ship. It was a 100-passenger ship. We'll get into a little bit more detail as we go further through. But my joy and my experience was in the continental landings themselves in this experience. And here is a video that I created for all of you. Yes, that's me. And yeah, that was all the images from my journey. So come to Antarctica with me. Let's see if I can manage to get out of that. What is Antarctica? It is, quote, all land and ice shelves south of the 60th parallel, which means 60 degrees south latitude. Look at that map in front of you. You can see South America, the Falkland Islands, the Antarctic Circle. That is all things that should be in your mind when you start to look towards the Antarctic. Our Earth, of course, is round. Things get narrower and narrower and narrower. Anyone going to the Antarctic is likely going to access from the southern tip of South America because we go into that little arm that you see sticking up. There are some expeditions that go out of Australia, but that's a little bit different. Now, where to go in the Antarctic? You can see the Falkland Islands and South Georgia. Some itineraries will include the Falklands. You see that polar circle there? That polar circle is that 60 degrees, and that is 66.3. That's a really, really, really big deal to get below that polar circle. The majority of travel you see from November to March is in the Antarctic Peninsula. That's where you'll find about 90% of the travel. And that's where we're going to go this afternoon. Some will go to the Ross Sea. And indeed, if you can imagine, there are folks who actually trek in to the South Pole. But if you think you're going to be using your points or staying at a Marriott, that's not the way it's going to be. And this is what we're going to look at. Going down to South America, to Ushuaia, those are the polar fronts. That is what makes Antarctica so darn exquisite. It's the fact that the water is so cold, that it is so nutrient rich. That's why the animals come down here. The penguins are well fed, the dolphins are well fed. It's also why the ride across the Drake Passage can be a little bit on the rough side. Look at that map of South America. You need to get a little bit of a handle on that. You're looking at Argentina. Internationally, you may come into Buenos Aires. There's 2 airports in Buenos Aires, so pay attention, my friends. Some ships do start and end in Buenos Aires. They'll go to the Falkland Islands, maybe out to South Georgia. If South Georgia sounds familiar, it should tie it in with Ernest Shackleton and all that happened with the Endurance. But when you look there, South Shetland Islands and down to the Antarctic Peninsula, that's where you're going to find about 90%, 95% of the folks that are going to go to the Antarctic. Ships can start and finish in Ushuaia and go down, which is what I did on the upper right-hand side with a nice 10-day itinerary. It does take about 36 hours to get from Ushuaia to the peninsula. If you would prefer not to sail over the Drake Passage, there are now options where you can fly. Some tour operators will start their programming in Buenos Aires and include a charter flight to Ushuaia. Others you can fly over into the South Shetlands, but there is not scheduled air. Those are charter programs, and they're very specialized, and they're also very expensive. But what you see here on the screen in front of you is very common in and out of Ushuaia with a full-on Antarctic itinerary and Antarctic Peninsula, or an itinerary from Buenos Aires that may dip over to the Falkland Islands in South Georgia. You can't go wrong in this part of the world. You just have to make some choices. And surprisingly, if you want to do a mainstream cruise, you can even do that. Get on board a ship in Uruguay, dip down to the Antarctic Peninsula, but you do not make any actual landings. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Lots of activities you can do there: camping, kayaking, hiking, mountaineering. It's getting more and more out there. But remember where you are. The Antarctic is a continent that has ice on top of it, and on average it's over 2 miles thick. And it all started down here on these Russian icebreakers that you see here. They were down doing scientific expeditions and carried a few passengers along with them. And then tourism started. And do you know, in 2007, there was only about 7,000 people a year who had gone down to visit the Antarctic. Ships like the Island Sky up there on the upper left, 100 passengers. That's the ship that I sailed on and chose to sail on in the Antarctic. Why? Because any ships that carry 500 passengers or more are not permitted to do any landings. And only 100 people at a time are allowed ashore. There are some mainstream cruises, as I mentioned earlier, that dip down to the Antarctic. They do what we call drive-bys. You see the Princess ship there. Hurtigruten operates a phenomenal fleet. Again, you got to take into consideration the size and the amenities. 300, 400, 500 people. That's why you use a travel professional. I love the Silver Cloud right there on the bottom. I was shore excursion manager. I worked on cruise ships for over almost 19 years. And that little baby in the bottom right-hand side was my ship. I sailed her down in South America, and she's still chugging away, and she's been re-outfitted and makes her way into the Antarctic. And yeah, you can go pretty foo-foo. There's some pretty high-end stuff there. There's some private charter yachts we can talk about. There's stuff like the Scenic Eclipse with helicopters. There's new companies like Atlas Expeditions, even Viking is going on down here. There's just so many ways that you can experience the White Continent. And this was the first way that I did it when I was shore excursion manager on board a Silver Cloud, the cruise ship you just saw in 1997. That was taken on the tarmac in Punta Arenas in southern Chile. And this was my group from the Silver Cloud, who everyone paid me $1,400 per person to get on board that charter aircraft so that we could look out the windows of the plane at the ice around the Antarctic. And that was in late November. I had the pleasure of doing a drive-by in Antarctica on a large vessel. I put this photograph in for a reason. You see the ship, this Princess ship, she does go down to the Antarctic. She also sails up in Alaska. I tell you, I'm looking at this, a picture, she is not in the Antarctic. There's lots of ice in the water. And how do I know? Because there's green trees and there's greenery. There is no greenery in the Antarctic. There's a small lichen in the Antarctic. Otherwise, all the images that you're going to see, everything is black and white. The only thing that shot any colors were our jackets when we made landings to go ashore. So you can do landings, you can do flyovers, you can do drive-by visits, but this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to eat it and drink it and smell it and sleep it and taste it. My oceanographer husband had been to the Antarctic, and he actually was in McMurdo, which was the scientific base, significantly further south than where I was. So I chose a ship, 100-passenger ship, and this was my actual itinerary on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side was the advertised itinerary. And you're going to come on that journey with me this afternoon. We're going to start from Ushuaia in the southern part of Argentina. I flew from the U.S. to Miami, Miami to Buenos Aires. I changed airports in Buenos Aires. You easily could have stayed here a few days, maybe go up to Iguazu Falls. I then flew down to the southern tip, and this is the most southern tip of the world. In fact, it's called Fin del Mundo, the end of the world, and that is Ushuaia, in Tierra del Fuego. in southern Argentina. We sailed out of Ushuaia in an evening about 5 o'clock. That night we were in the channel. The next morning about 7 o'clock we hit the open Drake Passage on our way down first to the South Shetland Islands. And this is where it all began. I absolutely love Ushuaia, and it has not changed a lick from when I ran shore excursions on board the Silver Cloud. That is the pier. That is where all of these ships that go to the Antarctic start and end from, right here. They take in all their provisioning, all their people, all of their crew. It's pretty impressive when you look at it and think everyone sails out of here and then comes back to this very spot. Big ships, little ships, private boats. There's a few other spots that you could provision. The security is amazing here. The airlift isn't that great. The season is short, November, December, January, February, up into March. And you're looking at about 55,000 people a year that are going to do what I did last December. And bear in mind, in 2007, about 7,000 people did what I did. And this is what Ushuaia looks like, the Fin del Mundo. It's a really fun place. I might have gone a few days earlier and done some kayaking and stayed in some neat spots. Ate some of the local king crab in one of the local restaurants, but I remind you how far away from things we are. I do not believe my trip to the Antarctic was expensive, given what I got for my dollar. I paid about $1,000 per person per day to be on board, about $1,100 per person per day. And that fed me, and that watered me, and that toured me, and that kayaked me, everything pretty much but the land. Look at this, that was Ushuaia. We had exquisite weather. We're traveling down here to South America in the summer months, which again are opposite to what we have, November, December, January, February. And we were underway. We set sail at 5 o'clock. We had dinner that evening. It was magnificent. The next day we were up out on deck, and that's exactly how we were on the Drake Passage. But believe me, the Drake Passage is where a lot of currents will come together. It's very nutrient rich, which is why the birds love it, which is why there's so many mammals and fish that enjoy this part of the world. It's a big old buffet. But that means the waters can be very rough, but it means sometimes they're not. And it wasn't during my journey. I didn't think I could get excited about terns and about these birds, and I did. Most ships will have an open bridge policy. Again, it depends on the size of vessel you're on. My ship had 100 passengers on board, which for me was perfect because only 100 people can go ashore at one time. This was Charlie. The bridge was pretty much open to us. The navigating, I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to maps, so they promised me I wasn't too annoying, but I got access to all the nav charts and the depth, and they answered all of my questions. And then we had this expedition team, and it really doesn't matter what ship you're traveling on, going to the Antarctic, you're going to have an expedition team. This is highly, highly regulated parts of the world. You'll learn about the temperate waters and the Antarctic waters and the coming together. This isn't really just about showing up at the party. This is really being a part of the party. Once you've been to this club, you're never quite the same person. And that was sunset on December 21st last year on our way through the Antarctic. The longest day of the year where I was, the shortest day of the year where you were up here. This is what folks are after. This is what the animals love. This krill, my husband was an oceanographer, traveled around the world talking about the krill and the oceans and what the krill does for us. And this was the expedition team that we had on board my vessel of choice. These are the kind of folks that you're going to meet, Pablo and Steffi. These are really amazing people. They have licenses to drive Zodiacs, and they've kayaked in places we've only heard of, and they're just changing the world one person at a time. And you're going to wish your children would bring one of these people home to be in your family, to suddenly marry into the family. But don't underestimate this continent. You got to be prepared, and you need to do your homework. Yes, it is a continent, and I'm really proud to say that I stepped foot on it. It is a continent covered with ice. It's the coldest, driest, and the windiest place on Earth. Did we freeze to death? No. The wind was pretty brutal. We were at sea level because I was on a cruise, and remember, sea level is sea level no matter what it is all around the world, but nobody lives here. The Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1961, but there were some shenanigans over the years. I'll let you do your history, but even Australia tried some shenanigans, and Hitler tried to squeeze in some territory for Germany and the Nazis at one point in time. Nice little Antarctic stamp down there that a lovely friend of mine sent me, and I now have in my collection. This was my chart. This was my itinerary out of Ushuaia with a day at sea on December 21st, where you saw that picture, Triangle Point. Yankee Harbor, Fournier Bay, Orne Harbor, Useful, Danko, Georges. I had 4 days on the ice, and every moment was absolutely exquisite. This was our mode of transport. You've got your expedition guides who are always with you. These are ornithologists and glaciologists. This particular dude had actually skied. I was going to use the word kayaked. No, he cross-country skied across one of the peninsulas in Antarctic. This is what we came across on the very first landing. And this is in South Shetland Islands. We're not even on the continent yet. Look at those penguins in the proximity. You wait, no matter where you are, you'll have the chicks that'll be feeding from mama, and depending where you're going, there's something like 70,000 ridiculous amounts of penguins everywhere. Mostly chinstrap and gentoo are what we saw, but these are all photographs from my trip. On my ship, I opted to take what was called the kayak option, which meant that that group you saw right there, we were dedicated kayakers for the entire journey. Some ships do it differently, where you can opt in on a daily basis, and that's where working with your travel professional makes all the difference in the world. But look at that topography, look at that geography. This is South Shetland Islands. You never saw the same thing twice. This is an area that not that many years ago, a gigantic glacier was here. It has retreated. And in fact, this landing that we did at Triangle Harbor was one of the first ever to have been done in the Antarctic. We kayaked, we zodiaced, we had phenomenal levels of experience. We got out on the water. Everything is always safe. Wind and proximity to the water is what really made things cold. We didn't get a lot of rain. We had a little bit of snow, but you can see how people are dressed. The jackets that you have on there, and that's Joseph in the back. He had a group of about 15 people on board. This was his 7th trip to the Antarctic. You should have seen his photographs. Those jackets are supplied by the vessels, and they often supply the boots as well. Each different operator can be a bit different. How close you can approach the animals, again, is regulated. Your naturalist guides are going to let you know about that, but you are going to be talking about the lifestyles and the chinstrap penguins, and you just watch them for hours. And these are some of our zodiac landings, but I draw your attention to the monochromatic features. There is no other colors. There's black, there's white. The white that you see on the rocks is thanks to our penguin friends. There were a tremendous amount of these guys laying around, not the walrus, that's someplace else. That's up in the Arctos, up in the northern end. And these guys were laying in the sand on rocks, and they are just gigantic masses of blubber that just belch and fart for days until they molt all of that stuff off of their skin and they rub up against each other. And as you're walking over the beaches, you got to pay attention to what you're looking at and what you're seeing. The photo opportunities are everywhere. And any ship worth their salt always has a photographer. That's one of the members of the expedition team. And there were 12 members on my expedition team for basically 100 of us. again, these aren't National Geographic images. These are from my trip itself. I showed you the chicks earlier. Mama goes out to feed, she comes back, the chicks tickle their throat, they regurgitate. This little one, if you're looking closely to the right-hand side, what goes in must come out as well. And there's our friend who is having some success at molting, rubbing up against everybody else on the beaches. And I'm not kidding. As you walk up the beaches, you've got to pay attention to what you're walking and where you're going. And on more than one occasion, I suddenly heard a terrible noise and looked up and realized that I had got closer than I needed to be. Binoculars are magnificent, but a camera lens will do the trick. And I just can't say it again and again how extraordinary these expedition leaders are. And they expedition personnel show up on different ships in the different markets. They're like their own little subculture. And one, our Zodiac ride, and his name has just gone out of my head for the moment, which is absolutely terrible. We had a wonderful connection. His son was on board as well. And the krill and all that cold water create, as I said earlier, a little bit of a buffet. And if you're really lucky, you may experience, as we did, something called bubble knitting. And that is when whales, essentially, I hate to call them lazy, but they will dive down and they will release little bits of air one bit at a time, and they will go in circles and they corral this krill in closer and closer and closer together, and the fish come in and eat off it. And finally, the humpback in particular will jump up, and as we were calling on the radio, having lunch. And that's called bubble netting. And you're never quite the same after you have seen this from a Zodiac in Antarctic. And the gentleman you see there, Patrick, on the left-hand side, that photograph is courtesy of him. We spent a lot of time in our Zodiacs. You were assigned a group to go with. It was really easy getting on and off. There's no bathrooms ashore. Managing ballast was a sort of a joke. You just managed your water intake. For heaven's sakes, you're only going out for maybe 2 hours at a time in the morning and maybe 2 in the afternoon again. But the days were early and long. You're there with the daylight. We had cloud. We had some great weather. And this is the kind of stuff you're looking at. I mean, this is hundreds of thousands of years old, and suddenly you'll hear a gigantic crack someplace, or someone will spot a bubble across the water, and a tail will come up. And I have to, again, give credit where credit is due, because this is Patrick's. And I have just got that photo blown up last week, and it's actually in getting framed. I bet you didn't know that there is a program called Happy Whale, and you can even go online and track where whales go, because whales that come here to the Antarctic also feed off of Baja in California. Some of them go up to Alaska. And what you're looking at here is essentially like looking at a human being's thumbprint. Whales can be recognized by their flukes. And this happened to be a new whale to science. This whale had not been sighted before. We took this photograph, uploaded it to Happy Whale, which is a library, a massive library that tracks whales around the world. I encourage you to take a look at it. And this was a new whale to science. It was an exquisite experience. Being in your Zodiac with no sound at all in these harbors, being fed phenomenal meals on deck. It was not too cold to be outside. This was my friend Lori. This was lunch on a very special day. And it was amazing to me what they pulled off on this dinner. My ship was called the Island Sky. It was one of the old Renaissance ships. It was the old Ren 5. So if you have been in the business any period of time, you'd be familiar with them. I was shocked at the quality and the caliber of the food. Wine was included with dinner. I mean, you can go foo-foo, you can go Viking, you can big ship, little ship. All the opportunities are there, but at the end of the day, this is what a daily activity is going to look like. These are what the activities. In the morning, a lecture. Join Ash and the team. Cetaceans. I had no idea that was a word. Cetaceans. That means whales. So I love chucking that word out. Most people who know the word cetaceans have been to Antarctica or have some level of knowledge. It's really cool stuff. Recap and briefing were really big, and that happened in every evening, always over a cocktail, always over photographs. And here's what a day of landings would look like. A landing in the morning at 9, another one at 2:30, a recap and a briefing. For heaven's sakes, a barbecue on deck and a cruise show. Remember, this was Christmas time. But please get the idea of a standard cruise out of your mind. This was a voyage. It was a journey. The ship was simply the vehicle. The most important thing were the landings and the people, the connections, the photos. Yankee Harbor, Triangle Point, there's that recap and briefing again. The presentations that were delivered on Shackleton and Scott, I assure you those presentations took on a lot of meaning, as some of us had a scotch in the evening time. Everyone had opinions. We have books. We had resources available. We met the chef in the galley. Meal requirements, anything can be handled pretty much ahead of time, but please remember that any ship's food requirements, everything is provisioned on in Ushuaia. And yes, you will have the opportunity to do this. This is called a polar plunge. On board our ship, there was almost 90 people, 70 some odd people opted to do the polar plunge. And this is what it kind of looked like after. And you know, John was with his mom on the trip. They were from West Virginia, and he was a social worker. I don't think he had any idea knowing what he was coming back to. We all got back December 31st. And he turned to someone as we were about to jump in the water. And he said, I always said, when you have an opportunity to have an experience, just say yes. And there was a woman who wasn't going to go in the water. She wasn't going to jump. And she listened to John, and she said, when you have an opportunity to have an experience, just say yes. And this is the kind of stuff that happens when you say yes to experience. You jump in the polar plunge. Cynthia was a single traveler, as was I. Many of the Antarctic operators, if you're a single traveler, will match you up with someone else. There's no single cabins down here. Couples who've dreamt of going here all their lives from New York City, had no kids, had never been in a kayak in their lives before. He was an ophthalmologist. They loved to golf. They loved to ski. And there they were, jumping in and doing the plunge in Antarctica. It's amazing what you'll do when you got a scotch on an empty tummy. But this is what you do when you have an opportunity to just say, yeah. Polar landings, and in some cases, the continent landing, when we actually landed on the continent of Antarctica, looked like this. There were trails that were there for us to follow. Walking sticks were provided. The jackets there, again, are there, as are the boots. And this is what we were treated to. Penguins going up, penguins coming down. You would just flop in the snow and start to watch them for a period of time. Your hat would come off because the wind would die down, or you'd been working up a little bit of a sweat. None of the walking or hiking was insanely difficult. It was just so worth it when you flopped in the snow, and for 25 minutes you were watching this chin strap penguin, who's covered in penguin poop, by the way, steal pebbles from all the other nests. And that's what they do. They're absolutely hysterical creatures to watch. But the only color is whatever it is you put on your body. There's no plants that are growing here. There's no animals, anything that is in the water. There's no vertebrate animal here. We were it. Everything else is in the ocean. These were exquisite. It was old, it was young, it was families, it was people from the US, it was people from overseas, it was bucket list. I was shocked at the amount of single travelers. I was shocked when I met this couple over here on the right-hand side that are holding a parachute magazine. We were in Antarctica in December. They met in September in Egypt, skydiving over the pyramids in Egypt. He was an IT guy from New York. She was a dentist, Philadelphia. This is who's there. Me on the left-hand side, one of the greatest days of my life, standing on the continent. My friends, that is the continent of Antarctic. That is number 7. And this is mostly what we saw in terms of penguins. And you gotta know your penguins. The gentoos, the chinstrap. We did not see many adelie. And when we did see an adelie, the naturalists with us burst into tears. It's like it's the first time that they've ever seen these things, yet they've been doing these trips forever, and you're safe in the kayaks, and they're trying so hard to give you these experiences. Look at that. How often in your life could you ever? You're looking at spots on the earth that no other human being is ever going to lay their eyes on again. We were in the water, and some of the icebergs did turn and roll. We were given very clear and very smart moves and decisions and instructions on how to paddle straight into the waves. And evening recaps were not unpleasant. I just absolutely loved this couple right here. That was, oh, terrible. I can't remember their names, but she was the dentist and he was the IT guy. Just an absolutely exquisitely beautiful couple. Things were very uncomplicated on board our vessel. Remember, again, you've got lots of ships to choose from, big and little. Mine was 100 passengers. There's others up to 400, 500. If you do choose the larger size vessel, just know that only 100 people at a time are allowed ashore. So whether that is done by lottery, whether it is done by you guys get the morning, you all get the afternoon, that's all a factor in the decisions of how you want your Antarctic experience to be. I needed it up close and personal in my face. I was journaling, I was photographing, I was hardly sleeping because there was just so much to see. There was just so much to do. There was so many people learning the stories and the histories. I mean, the history of this continent is relatively new. Cynthia, I showed you picture of her jumping in the water. I admired her so tremendously. She completed radiation for breast cancer 4 days before she got on the plane, and her doctor cleared her to come down and just enjoy the trip of a lifetime. We had some families and kids. The left-hand side, they were from Israel. His father was my companion in my kayak. We were in a double kayak. And Naomi on the right-hand side memorized that face because that child is going to be running a country someday. And I am so glad that I met her and her grandparents down on the white continent. I mentioned about the jackets being supplied and the boots. That's pretty much a norm. I'll give you a packing list in a little while. It's really mostly your attitude you need to focus on. It's not that cold here. Is it chilly? Yeah. Is it windy? Yeah, it is the Antarctic, but we were at coastal level. Some days were worse than others. Sometimes the weather really kicked up. Out on deck, man, when I got the binoculars on and I got hanging around Zoe here, this was our photographer's daughter actually, her enthusiasm was just so exquisite. And when we saw the orcas on deck, I swear if I had to jump in the water to get a closer view of them, I probably would have. That's how wrapped up in the experience when suddenly whales and it's yours. And you're looking at landscapes like this. And these are some of the outer islands, not on the continent of the Antarctic, across the Lemaire Channel on some of the outer lying islands. Cocktail drinks definitely take on a new meaning when you pull this puppy out of the ice. Exquisite, this is called black ice. Why? When it's in the water, it is so compressed. Water is so tightly push, compressed. There's no air left inside. When it floats in the water, you're looking right through it. What you're looking at when you look through it, all the plankton in the water, so it looks like it's black. When you pluck it out of the ice like that, you discover that it's clear ice. We sought these, brought them inside our Zodiac, and took great pleasure in tossing chunks of those into a cocktail glass in the evening time. There is no question that these kind of trips change your life. There was fathers and sons. There was couples, there was families, there was me traveling by myself. I was surprised there was several other women whose husbands stayed home with the kids who said, no, it's just not my cup of tea. But this is what daily activities were. A Zodiac cruise in Fournier Bay, our landing at Ornay Harbor, the recap and briefing, which happened every single day in the lounge, and you're swapping photographs and stories and high fives, and I got that fabulous photograph of you. And then you're asking questions about who was the greater leader, Scott or Shackleton. And there it was, Paul, British guy. So interesting. These people have stories. They have done more in 1 year of their life than many of us have ever done in our lifetimes put together. You know, there's a history here of sailors that have come back, but no one has lived here. And if you think that Antarctic doesn't change you, that was my experience in Antarctic. And meet Alice right there. June 2nd, she joined my family, and I became so addicted to kayaking. Thanks to the Antarctic, let's just say it's a lot easier to get dressed up to go kayaking like that, 3 miles from my house. But that's what the kind of Antarctic stuff does to you. These are the people from my trips. This is how you pack. It's really not complicated. It's really not that cold. It's always kind of sad when people say, oh, it's too cold. Really? That would stop you from having this kind of an exquisite, life-changing experience? Just dress appropriately. The big stuff's given to you. I kind of discovered that since I became a big girl and got some of this stuff, that whole new worlds have opened up to me now. Sunglasses and sunblock and binoculars and bags, dry bags that I now use. Decent, shoes. Well, the walking shoes were not that big of a deal, but dressing in layers. I now think cuddle duds are the bomb. I didn't think I'd wear this kind of clothing in Florida, but I do. And it's the pants, and the top would be your base layer. Maybe put a second layer on top. And in some cases, I would put a second base layer down on the bottom. Maybe a pullover on top. I loved those REI pants, so I might have one pair of the long johns and then the REI pants, or those particular zipper pants were also very comfortable. Up top, you got another third layer to put on top. And on the bottom right-hand side are the weathered pants, waterproof pants that you need in order to get into the Zodiacs. You will not be allowed to go ashore without those. It's just not a big deal. I think they were about $40 over on Amazon, or I think I got those at REI. Not really a big deal, but I will say for a Florida girl who did not own a pair of closed-toed shoes, I spent about $700 getting ready to go to the Antarctic, and that's with several layers of cuddle duds and pants and stuff I'm still wearing today, I'm not gonna lie. So you'd have a base layer, like say the gray pants on the gray bottom, and then maybe toss that next pair, the one with the guy with the shoes on, maybe put that on top, and then have your waterproof pants. So 1, 2, 3 layers. If you're really cold, toss on another pair of long johns. Underneath at the top, you got your layer 1, layer 2, maybe toss on a fleece or a jacket and you're good to go. But this is what it was. It was a matter of layering and discovering what you like and what works for you. Socks, you had to get a couple of pairs of socks. I had no idea what a gator was, G-A-I-T-O-R. I live in Florida. The only gators we have are G-A-T-O-Rs, which I really avoid at all costs. So I didn't know what some of this stuff was, but you'll be given a list. Here's the fun thing, hats. I had no idea as I went ashore that was about the only thing that was going to be able to recognize myself in half the photographs, because everybody's wearing the red jackets. Everyone looks exactly the same. But a couple of pair of gloves, heaven forbid you get anything wet. But if you're going kayaking, there's that dry suit, and they supply that for you. And that's what it took to go kayaking on the left side in Antarctic. So let's just say when I got to jump in Alice around the corner, it was a little bit of a picnic. Going ashore in the Zodiacs or hanging out and doing one of the Zodiac rides, just what you see on the right-hand side. Few pairs of pants. You can see the black pants, the waterproof pants on top, the jacket, the gaiter, the hat. It was magnificent. But I'll tell you one thing. Look at those sunglasses on the right and the left. It's always the little things in life. This is really stupid, but it's always the little things. Those sunglasses on the left were stupid. The stupidest sunglasses I bought with me, the big Jackie O sunglasses. Yes, they were my prescription glasses. Yes, they were good. They were huge. I could not get my hat low enough over my eyes. Glasses on the right-hand side, another pair of definitely good glasses. You gotta have the blue block thingies. But notice how they were much flatter. I could pull my hat down a lot lower. Stupid things, but they made a significant difference. And that Mickey Mouse hat again, so I could stand out everywhere. But these were the guys. These were the crew. This was the expedition team. About a dozen of them to look after 90 some odd of us, from a doctor, a photographer, an expedition leader, a glaciologist, a marine biologist. You get it. These were some of the most beautiful people I've ever met in my life. Many of them, the kayak guides, for example, work in Canada in the summer months, and then they'll come down to Antarctic in the winter months. You might find them working in Iceland or Greenland. But these kind of folks that do the Antarctic are specialized. It takes an awful lot to do what they do. This was our list of what we saw on the left-hand side, which is pretty darn good. Fin whales, minke whales, humpback whales. We saw a lot of Arctic terns, the kelp gulls, petrels. You don't think you get excited when you see a petrel in the Antarctica? You're wrong. You will get excited about those birds. It just happens. But in terms of little things, bring a portable humidifier. If you're sensitive at all, I'm very sensitive to headaches. I discovered that little puppy on the upper right-hand side. Cannot tell you how many people I've gifted that little humidifier to. You are going to need a ton of lip balm. Just keep it handy. And all the jackets, believe it or not, little Uggs to walk around the ship were just perfect. Kick your shoes off at the end of the day. Nothing's a big deal. It's funny, today we look for hand sanitizers. In the Antarctic, we have hand warmers. Pop them in your shoes, down your back. I love popping those down the back of my shirt. And lots of other people say, here, would you drop that down my jacket? It was great. But again, it really wasn't that cold. Have some fun, make some cookies ahead of time. It's kind of crazy what you can do with round cookies. And believe it or not, that is just, whatever you call that stuff, that sugar that you cut out on top. You can do the polar bears on the left-hand side. Here's the thing, though. We're in the Antarctic. Polar bears are in the Arctic. Arctos. We are Antarctic. There's no polar bears in the Antarctic, but you'll find the penguins that are there. And really, what a great activity to make some cookies, and it's kind of addictive, but yeah, that's what they look like at the end of the day. So Antarctica is really an extraordinary place. It's not the easiest spot to get to in the whole wide world, but I will share with you, these memories are keeping me alive. They live in my heart and soul. And to me, that's exactly what life is really all about, because it's up to us. You know, we've got to create it. And I can't explain why, but something called me to nail this continent before the end of last year. It was a conscious effort on my part to go to that final continent before the end of 2020. And I'm so glad I did, because last year I was just one of 55,489 people to go to the Antarctic, which personally I happen to think is kind of cool. So there, my friends, is a story of my Antarctic. If you want to do something fun, watch the movie Happy Feet. Believe me, I had more than one bottle of wine and watched that movie. Where did you go, Bernadette? As many of my girlfriends said to me, I was Bernadette. And I did go to the Antarctic seeking purpose. And frankly, I think for the most part, I found it. find your way into the kitchen and make some penguin cookies and decorate the top of them. It's really not that hard. Try a book about the Antarctic. The Endurance is really a very good read, man. When you see what Shackleton and his men went through for years on end, it is absolutely, absolutely unbelievable. But I do encourage you to look up Happy Whale, and that's the website that tracks these whales. And Citizen Science is a program, and I'm just going to lob that in because some cruise companies that are smaller will do something like Citizen Science, where they really actually are also not only taking tourists to the Antarctic, but collecting scientific data as well and allowing you to be part of that. And there are options to be able to do that too. So thanks to all of you for joining me in the Antarctic. I guess I could leave the screen right there. Do you want me to give that back to you? And I will open that up for questions.
Yeah, I actually have some pictures to share as well. So
Yay!
go ahead and give that back to me.
This is just such an exquisite place. I cannot say to you enough how, oh, yes. Oh, you did that to torture me.
Yes, well, I mean, this, I will admit, I'm putting this
Yes.
up here because this is my husband's #1 bucket list item to do, is to actually camp on the continent, and it
Yes.
is possible to do. So I wanted to throw up some pictures showing people setting up their tents, and then what it looks like when they've got their tents set up and they get to spend the so-called night camping. I don't know that they actually really sleep while they're on the ice, but yeah, they leave their ship after dinner because you're not allowed to have any food with you while you're on the continent. So they leave after dinner, they spend the night camping, and then they're back on the ship the following morning before breakfast is served. It is definitely not glamping. It is the roughest.
Exquisite.
Yeah, it is true camping. It is roughing it in the true term. But it is something that a lot of people look forward to being able to do on the continent because it is so unique to be able to say that you got to sleep on the continent of Antarctica. And then, of course, this is just like some of the pictures you had of being able to take the Zodiacs out and looking at the ice formations, of course, being able to land on the continent on a Zodiac, kayaking. And you talked about this a little earlier, just the kayaking and getting that close to a whale fluke. I just think would be,
there's no words,
mind-boggling. And of course, little chin strap watching the world go by. And I had a question for you, and seeing this picture reminded me of it. What kind of camera equipment would you recommend? I mean, most of us these days when we go on vacation, we're just taking our cell phones to take pictures, but she's carrying this old-fashioned contraption called a camera.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering how many people on your trip actually had bona fide cameras versus just using a cell phone to take pictures?
It's funny. I have sort of an idiot-proof point and shoot that I got a number of years ago. I used it in Africa to bring the animals in close, and it was very good. I used my iPhone, and I'll tell you why. There was just so much landscape, and the thing is, the ship, almost everyone has a photographer anyway, and they made a point to say to us, and it literally, and went around even at dinner time and said, we will get all the pictures. You will have every picture that you need of all, and we will make sure you even get in them.
Oh, that's good.
And they actually handed us a DVD with all the images at the end of the day. So, and we still had some pretty die-hard photographers who were, would have been going down with the ship, photographing stuff. So, it's a great place to go for a die-hard photographer, but I personally, iPhone works fine.
Okay. So we do have quite a few questions that some were submitted before.
Ah.
We started, some came through during your presentation. So we're just going to go through between me and Maria and see if we touch upon all of them and make sure we get people's questions answered. One question we had is, what was the temperature when you did the polar plunge? And I don't know if they meant
1 degree. It was 1 degree. And I
Fahrenheit?
will tell you, 1 degree, and that was with a shot going in and a shot coming out. It was fabulous.
Shot of?
Well, schnapps coming out and scotch going in.
So that's what warmed you up. Okay. And the whole time that you were down there in Antarctica, I mean, what were the temperatures always below freezing, or?
No, they weren't. It really wasn't that cold. It's kind of a myth, and I think if you're on land and you're inland, it just depended on the wind, and if it was rainy and things would come up pretty quick. You just needed to dress for the weather and dress in layers, and it was shocking how quickly the weather would change. And just shocking in a minute how quickly the weather would change. And the thing about it is that getting in and out of the zodiacs was not that big of a deal. Some folks were a little physically challenged, and they knew what was ahead of them at the landings, and they would have a chance to look at them. And a couple of times, Sarah, I remember Sarah looked and she said, "No, I don't think so. I'll just go back to the ship, thanks." And that can definitely happen. But most of the time you'll find the naturalist will describe and show in photos pretty clearly what it demands of you physically. And the thing is, what I learned very quickly was people who paid that kind of money to go that far, you're looking at a minimum of $1,000 a person per day. They're going to give it a try. They didn't give up too easy. They were pretty fit.
Okay, well, that leads into Alessandra's question, asking how physically fit do you have to be to do this trip?
We're not that bad. I mean, yeah, I was kayaking and it took a little more physically fit, but there were lots of people on the ship who weren't. You got to be able to do a little bit. You saw some of the hikes and areas, and some folks went part way and turned around. But I'll tell you, man, I've discovered when people want to do what they want to do, they'll find it.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
Always.
Let's see. Monique had a question, and I answered it privately for her, but I wanted to ask it publicly as well for anybody watching the recording later on. Why is there a limitation to only 100 people on shore at a time?
That's all that can really be handled. Great question. This is, the International Association of Antarctic Tour Operators Association. That's what they feel can be handled and regulated. They could shut a site down. It's a very complicated place as far as the landings go. You have to bid for them in advance and you get points, and it's quite a complicated system. Galapagos is very much the same way. The Inca Trail is very much the same way as well. And we just simply can't have over tourism. It's hard to get the resources in, resources out. This is the most extreme place in the mundo, in the whole entire world. It doesn't get any more remote than this.
Okay.
So we're going to be real careful how it's managed. And if a ship is suddenly disabled and you can't get people out of there, I'll give you an example. I could not take this trip without having insurance. You can't just not say, nah, I'm not going to take insurance. You're not allowed to get on board that ship without insurance. If you have a heart attack in the middle of the Drake Passage, there ain't nobody coming for you. You got to remember where you're going.
Very true. Monique also wanted to know if you had to have previous experience in adventure trips before you went to Antarctica.
Oh, heck no. I would say heck no. I would think anything, shoot, as long as you like ice. That's the thing that was so magnificent about it, is that so few people had ever laid their eyes on it, that it was these ice structures, if you will, that are hundreds of thousands of years old, and the penguins, and the solitariness of it was just exquisite. It was just beyond anything I dreamed of. And other people I know have been to the Antarctic. You look at them and sort of go, welcome to the club. It's something else. And if someone wants it bad enough, they'll happen. I didn't get my new kitchen because I went to the Antarctic. I'll get a kitchen next year.
Okay, Maria, do you have any questions?
Okay, so how safe are the cruises? Have there been any drownings or other accidents reported?
Not that I'm aware of. There was an incident a number of years ago. Oh gosh, well before things are the way they are now. You'd have to look it up. It was one of the big red boats. There was a guy from Seattle. Sorry, I'm rambling. I know a little bit, but yes, there was a ship that sank down there a number of years ago, and that is another reason why the regulations are as they are. My entire trip, to answer Alejandro, I see what you've got typed in here. Door to door, my trip was like a little bit of an express, dude. So I was door to door, Tampa, Miami, Miami, BA, Ushuaia, 2 overnights in Ushuaia, 9 sleeps on board the ship. And then the flights back from Ushuaia, I was 14 days door to door. 14 days door to door, and I spent about $14,000 on that trip with air, land, everything like that. 2 overnights to enjoy the city, and in case there was an issue, I really liked Ushuaia. I'd been there before. It's a really cool place. There's not a lot of hotels to choose from, so I chose this spa hotel up in the hill, and it had this killer spa. I could swim, I could read, I could journal. This trip was a real healing journey for me, and I did not want to go from airplane to embarkation. I really wanted that space. By the same token, I didn't want to get off in Buenos Aires and then go stay. I'd been there before. I didn't want any cities. So were I to do it again, I might do a little bit more kayaking down there, maybe Iguazu Falls. I'd consider tacking on Buenos Aires on the front or back, but for me, for this journey, I wanted Antarctica. It was in and out. So the flight, the 2 nights, the hotel, the back, and it was awesome. It was everything I dreamt it would be and more.
There's another question on here about whether or not a travel visa was required.
No, nobody owns it. There's no, I mean, you got to go into Argentina to start the cruise, but you know, to go to Antarctica, nobody lives there. There's a few bases for scientific purposes, but nope, no visa unless Argentina requires it, because that's, you know, Ushuaia is where you're getting on. Unless you're flying. If you're flying, you could be going from Punta Arenas, which would be in Chile. So as far as those countries, that's why it's smart to use a travel agent.
There was a question earlier about the country being the size of Belgium, and I didn't write the entire thing down. If Mark, I think it was you who asked the question. If you're still on, could you please put your question back in the chat?
And Jeanette, I see here when you say, do penguins acknowledge the presence of humans? No, they just look at you. I mean, you're just there. And that's another reason why you're limited in the number of people ashore. And the naturalists are also extremely protective. There's laws and regulations. They go ahead and block off. You can walk up to that point. Do not walk past the cross arms. So no, they couldn't give a hoot. You're nothing to them. Absolutely. Kind of like Galapagos. They kind of really don't care. But you will be at a point. Antarctica is the size of Belgium. No, Antarctica is a lot bigger than Belgium. I'm not sure where that came from. Maybe that was a statistic on perhaps on one of the peninsulas about the size of Belgium. But Antarctica is massive as a continent. It's huge. It's one of the biggest in the world. But I'll see if I can dig up the Belgium analogy there. But no, Belgium's pretty small. Antarctica is pretty fucking big.
Okay, so let's see. Monique had also asked about the smooth sailing. So we know your sailing was smooth. Do you think it's because of the time of year?
Yeah. No, the time of year is the same. It's the summer, November, December, January, February. Try getting through the rest of the year. It's all frozen over. No, it's just seriously Mother Nature and the luck of the draw. Just a crapshoot. I would bet for bad weather. I would bank on bad weather. It is the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Inhospitable body of water in the world, the Drake Passage. So I think you better plan on needing seasick tablets. I think it would be better to start there. And then if you don't, you scored.
It's a bonus for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful.
Well, and you got the ways around it. You can always do those flights. It's a little more costly, and those are charter flights and stuff. But I'm afraid I'm a tad of a purist. And, the explorers before you read Shackleton's book, he's not going to have a cozy cruise ship. But you know, sometimes you got to pay to play, and that's what keeps it exciting. That's what keeps it, you earn your way to the Antarctic. It should be hard to get to.
We did have a question earlier asking if this was a kid-friendly type
Oh,
trip.
heck yeah.
And what's the youngest age that you think would be allowed to, travel?
Oh, I would definitely see. Now, this ain't going to be a kid that needs to be on his device all the time. I mean, you'll have an internet connection, but you'll pay dearly for it. You are in the Antarctic after all. You'll be pretty lucky. First of all, the captain and the navigation bridge get the first signal, and then you guys get it afterwards. But yeah, the kids that would be homeschooled, that are like totally into sciences, that little Naomi, that kid from Egypt, phenomenal. But frankly, any family who's going to bring a kid and spend that kind of money on them, they're probably doing a good education thing. Huge, phenomenal experience for these kids. There's ships that even have programs specifically for kids. That little Naomi was all over our science projects. Pulling the plankton samples in, reading the navigation charts on the bridge, like getting our latitude and our longitude. It was awesome. So, oh yeah.
Wonderful. Are there any other questions?
Doesn't look like it. Okay. Well, I'm going to go back real quick here. Let's see. Hold on. That did not work. Okay, so I just, in closing, want to remind people how you can find us on Facebook. It's a group. It's called Take a Virtual Vacation. We don't have the link up here, but we also have a YouTube channel where you can find our previously recorded sessions. Like this one will be uploaded tonight. And we're starting the Eat, Drink, Travel meetup groups. But if you go into the Facebook group specifically, you can find the information on our future virtual vacations that we have planned. Right now, we have coming up dude ranches, because that's something different and it's domestic. And so we're going to do a dude ranch next week. And then we're going to go across the pond to this little country called Italy. And that's in 2 weeks, and that's going to be then followed up by Hawaii. And then we haven't got the August dates set up yet, but we are talking about going to the Galapagos, Machu Picchu, and then maybe some more domestic Northern American type destinations as well. But you'll be able to find all of that information definitely in the Facebook group, Take a Virtual Vacation. If you join that group, of course, we'll be more than happy to let you in. It's, not an exclusive membership or anything like that. If you have any questions, you can always email any of the four of us, myself, Maria, Barbara, or Gail. And, we'd be more than happy to answer questions. And then, of course, when you're ready to go to Antarctica, we would be happy to help you with that as well. But for now, that is it for today. We're going to, have this posted later on so that you can, for those who weren't able to actually attend, can watch the recording, or if you're just really dying to go back to Antarctica, you will be able to rewatch this later on. But we would really like to thank Jennifer for doing this for us today.
Hey, Susan, real quick, we did have a last minute question come in.
Oh, okay.
How many days of trip is suggested?
Wow, tough question. On my itinerary, I was 4 days on the ice, and maybe that's how you need to look at it, to get there, to get back again. If I could go back and do it again, I would love to do South Georgia and the Falklands, because there's species of penguins over there that you can't really see. 14 days is the minimum. If you can do 21 days, that's a long time for me, just personally. I was on the ice for the 4 days. I could have happily had 2 more days on the ice and been very, very satisfied. So it's very different experiences. But after 4 days, you're leaving still wanting more. I wasn't satisfied. Like I wanted more. Other people had said, done, been there, had enough, I'm done. I'm like, nope, I could take another day of this, maybe another day and a half, and leave still wanting more. But I want to go to South Georgia because I want to see where Shackleton was. That requires more time and effort.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us. And we hope to see you next week when we hit the Dude Ranch.
Whoa, fun.
Thank you so much. See you in a week. Bye.
Bye-bye.